Greetings once again from Victoria. My name is Garnet Schulhauser, and I'm the author of 4 books in the spiritual metaphysical genre. And information about all of my books and buy links to acquire them on all the popular online stores can be found on my website, which is garnetschulhauser.com. I'm also a level 2 QHHT practitioner, and today's video will be about a fascinating past life experience one of my clients had during one of my sessions. But before we get into that, the funny story for today is as follows. It turns out that one day a brunette entered an elevator at work with a blonde. The brunette turns to the blonde and says, TGIF. The blonde looks at her and says, SHIT. Well, the brunette thinks that the blonde did not hear her, so she repeats, TGIF. And the blonde repeats SHIT. Now the brunette's getting very frustrated at this blonde and why she can't understand what she's saying. So she gives up and says verbally, thank God it's Friday. And the blonde smirks and says to her, sorry honey, it's Thursday. Now, as many of you know, there are 2 parts to a QHHT session. In terms of the trance. The first part of the trance, the client is taken back to one or more past lives chosen for her by her higher self, and usually the past life has some relevance to her current life. Second part is when we contact the client's higher self to get the answers to the questions that have been troubling the client, and we always ask the client to bring a list of questions they want the answers for. In any event, in terms of the first part of the trance, the past life can actually be a past life, a parallel life, or even a future life. It can be life as a human on Earth, or as an animal on Earth, or as an alien life form on another planet. Because many of us have had many past lives, not just on Earth, but on other planets and in other life forms. Now, most of the past life regressions I've done with my clients are fairly ordinary past lives as humans on Earth, where nothing really exciting or unusual happens. And that's sort of the predominant in terms of the past lives that we encounter. But occasionally we run into a client that has experiences or views a very interesting, unusual, or extraordinary past life, and those are the ones that really make me sit up and take notice. So I'd like to relay to you one very fascinating if not somewhat gruesome tale of a young lady who came for a session with me. In any event, she easily went into a very deep trance. When she came off the cloud, she found herself standing in an open plaza surrounded by houses and buildings that were adobe-like with red tile roofs. She described herself as a young teen, and she was wearing sandals on her feet, a long, brightly colored skirt on the bottom half of her body, and a short poncho or shawl on the upper part of her body. The plaza was filled with many other people dressed in similar attire, and gradually she made her way out of the plaza down a side street towards her home. When she reached her house, she was greeted warmly by her mother, who gave her a very warm hug and told her that this was a very special day because she had been chosen by the high priest to participate in a religious ceremony at one of the pyramid temples in the city. Now, my client had never before been to a religious ceremony at a temple, so she had no idea what to expect, but she assumed that it was an honor because her mother seemed quite excited at the prospect of her participating in the ceremony. So she followed her mother out of the house towards one of the temples. When they reached the base of the temple, her mother gave her a warm goodbye hug, and then she was led into a small room at the base of the temple. Inside there was a priestess who told her to take off her clothes and put on a long white robe. She then followed the priestess up the stairs to the very top of the pyramid, where she was greeted by the high priest and his entourage. Well, she didn't know what to expect, but so she stood there as the high priest slowly circled around her, muttering incantations and prayers that she did not understand. And then, much to her surprise, the high priest approached her from behind, slipped the robe off her shoulders, where it dropped to the ground, and she was standing there, stark naked, in front of the crowd that had gathered at the base of the pyramid. The crowd cheered openly and with great excitement, and as they anticipated what was next to come. And then, without any warning, she was grabbed by the high priest's assistants and forced to lay down on a stone slab, and they held her down by her arms and her legs. And then, much to her horror, the high priest approached her, carrying a very long knife, which he brandished in the air to the cheers of the crowd. And then, without further ado, the high priest plunged this big knife into her chest. But just before the knife had reached her body, she found herself hovering outside of her body, and she was now in an out-of-body state. And because of this, she did not feel any pain or discomfort as the knife plunged into her chest. But she watched with horror as the high priest made a long incision in her chest, and then, to the cheers from the crowd, he plunged his hand into her chest, grabbed her still beating heart, pulled it out, and waved it high above his head to the applause of the crowd. She said it was a gruesome scene to witness, and that the only saving feature was that she had left her body before the knife began to do any damage on her body. We found out later in the session from her higher self that she was one of the many virgins who had been sacrificed to appease the gods in the city of Tekel. And that's the city that she was living in when her body was sacrificed around 800 AD. When my client came out of trance, she then told me that she now understood why she had been suffering from medically inexplicable pains in her chest for most of her life. She now understood that it related to that life in Tekel, and the chest pain was really a carryover from her very gruesome death. The good news is that my client contacted me several weeks after the session and told me that immediately after the session and continuing on, she had totally lost any chest pains that she'd previously experienced, and she felt perfectly healthy. So that was the good news. Anyway, that's all for now, folks. Remember to keep on dancing and enjoy your journey.